Time now for Focus, and today we have a report from Sierra Leone as the West African country prepares to vote for a new president on Wednesday. Ernest Bai Koroma is stepping down after 2 terms in office. It was on his watch that about 4,000 people died from Ebola. The outbreak ended 2 years ago, but survivors say they're still dealing with the consequences and the authorities haven't helped much. Patrick Fondiot and Leone de Bassompierre sent us this report.
Set on steep hills above a valley at the edge of the Atlantic is Freetown, the overcrowded capital of Sierra Leone, the theatre of tragedy that has been engraved in people's minds, with the Ebola virus now synonymous with one of the city's main cemeteries. Here it is, 2 years after the end of the epidemic, invaded by weeds, with its hundreds of tombs as if abandoned. It's been a long time since her son has been here where most of the graves were dug in 2014 at the height of the epidemic that claimed his mother. Today she rests in an unkempt grave, which angers her son.
Now look at their graves. There is no proper caring. The government is just making such negligence over our people. This is one of the signs that we are totally abandoned. That we are totally left out. Ebola survivors, we are neglected.
Her son, an Ebola survivor, also lost his father, mother-in-law, 3 brothers, a son, and his wife, who is buried a little further. But like thousands of survivors, he was never able to find the graves of 4 of 7 missing loved ones. 2 years later, an impossible mourning.
How can I mourn for my loved one that I don't know where they buried her, standing in front of the grave of my wife? I cannot be convinced that this is the grave of my wife, because there are so many mistakes.
Outside the capital, Freetown, Matiri is one of the villages decimated by Ebola. Here, nearly 70 people died, leaving dozens of orphans behind.
Our national flag is green, white and blue. The green color is for agriculture. The white color is...
A makeshift school where 322 students are crammed into 4 rooms made of clay. Most of them are orphans who themselves are Ebola survivors, like Safinatu, school children supported by their principal.
The headmaster encouraged me, the survivors, told me that don't think about your parents, did well at school, then we continue to do well at school. I need someone to help me for my education because I don't have bag at school. Only this man helped me to give me books, pen, and pencil.
An isolated school that, for lack of resources, can only rely on the solidarity of other survivors of Ebola, grouped together in an association led by Yusuf Kaba.
Hey, yes, Sakano. Yes, that's been a while.
Really?
How are you doing?
Well, fine.
He also survived the virus, and thanks to his activism, the school was able to afford a roof. But in his eyes, there's a lot more to be done for these orphans.
So we have about 11,000 orphans generally in the whole country that are suffering, going through a whole lot of challenges, really. Ebola is gone, but everything is not over yet in the country. People are dying every day of the day-to-day challenges. The healthcare issues are there.
The aftermath of Ebola remains a major issue for residents of this fishing district of Freetown. Yusuf is here to hold a meeting of his Survivors Association. There are mostly women in attendance, women who are suffering from joint pain, hearing impediments and losing their sight, like Awa.
The problem is this, whenever if I come out this, for Nani, see nothing. I like to make action before me so.
Our right to health, our right to life has been violated by the government of this country through the mismanagement, because the country mismanaged $50 million And that resources should have addressed these health complications, should have money to take care of our health status. So the only means, the only hope that we have is to file case against the government.
1 million.
Millions of dollars in international aid gone missing, with very little money paid directly to the survivors. Today, this group is receiving a once-off payment of the equivalent of €260. It's barely enough to last a few days and a drop in the ocean of what is needed.
For more on this, I'm now joined by David Zunminu. He's a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa. Hello, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, what's your assessment of how President Karoma has handled the aftermath of Ebola?
Look, I think the way the government of Sierra Leone responded to the Ebola stemmed from the fact that there have never been any contingency plan to absorb or to respond to situations like Ebola. I think every country in the region, every country affected in the region was not prepared actually for that. And the way it has been managed and even the post-management of Ebola remain a problem. And the consequences will be felt during these elections. The corruption that has characterized the governance under Ernest Bai Koroma actually affects also the response that was developed toward Ebola. And I think the next government is expected to do something at least to give new hope to those who have been affected in Sierra Leone and elsewhere.
So how much is corruption an issue in this election?
I think the new government is expected to be vigorous in tackling corruptions, because it's not only about the management of the funds directed or the earmark to fight Ebola or to help the victim of Ebola, but it's also the corruption that has characterized the governance of natural resources in the country. While Ernest Bai Koroma could be credited for helping Sierra Leone consolidating its democratic institutions and also helping Sierra Leone in maintaining the peace that they gained from the decade of war in that country, he did not do much to reinforce the institutions that could hold accountable ministers, government officials, and political cronies who continue to simply divert resources from the socioeconomic need of the citizens. So I think the newcomers, whether it is from the APC or the Sierra Leone People Party, will have to be very direct and decisive in making sure that corruption is fought head-on.
So what's your prediction then for this election? Who do you think is going to come out on top, and what are the main challenges going to be?
I think the elections remain fairly open between the APC and the SLPP. Many citizens in Sierra Leone still remain unemployed. I think the unemployment rate is around 43%. Corruption is very high. Hospitals still remain very poorly equipped. We have seen it during the Ebola crisis. What is expected of the new government, whether it is from the APC or the SLPP, is simply to make sure that they maintain the peace process. Political alternatives, political change in terms of power is important. Maintaining the fragile gain from peace is okay, but also meeting the need of the population in one of the poorest countries in Africa or in the world remain a challenge for any government that might come out of the next elections.
All right. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That was David Zunminu joining us a day before voters in Sierra Leone head to the polls.
Thank you for having me.